Chapter 4272. That bastard obviously wanted to do it in the car. But she didn't expect that the more she struggled, the angrier he became. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore, and really wanted to do it. Juan was anxious. She didn't want to have sex with him at this time, let alone in the car. Amidst those hurried breaths, a crisp sound rang out. She had slapped him. Chinemo sobered up a little. He probably didn't expect Juan to do it for real. He was a little dazed, and didn't come back to his senses for a long time. After a long time, Juan slowly moved herself to the seat next to him, and said in a low voice, "I want to go home." Chinemo stared at her, and sobered up a little. Then he said in a hoarse voice, "Isn't this your home? Don't talk about divorce. I thought we made up after everything that happened between us." "Juan, are you going to deny it now?" Juan closed her eyes slightly. "I don't deny it. But I also don't deny my disappointment in you when I saw Aijia." She looked at him quietly. "Only one of us can be by your side. Chinemo, think about it carefully." After saying that, Juan kicked the car door. Of course, she didn't manage to kick it open. Instead, her foot hurt. She turned back to look at Chinemo. Chinemo didn't seem to care. Juan was furious, but she couldn't do anything. She just sat there in silence. After a long time, she said very softly, "What do you mean by this? Chinemo, you're keeping me here and not letting me go. You're playing a rogue with me, because you want to keep seeing Aijia." Chinemo looked at her and said in a hoarse voice, "Why are you crying?" Juan was very angry, and turned her head away. "It's none of your business. Open the car door." He put his hand on the steering wheel and knocked on it. "It's hard to get a taxi now, especially in this neighborhood. Plus, you're dressed like this." "It's none of your business," she said unreasonably. Chinemo smiled. "The child isn't mine. I'm not interested in sleeping with other women." All of a sudden, he dragged her over again and began to grope her. "Tell me, if I had something with another woman, would I still be like this now? I would have long been a soft-footed shrimp." Juan was embarrassed and angry at the same time. She was already angry, but he didn't seem to have anything else besides his jade-like body. Did he think that nothing else mattered between them other than their clean bodies? She was embarrassed and angry. She wanted to slap him a few more times, but he was too strong. She couldn't do anything about it. Just as the temperature in the car was slowly rising, his phone rang. Chinemo ignored it, and continued to bully Juan. But his phone stubbornly rang again and again. He picked up the phone impatiently, and was about to hang up when he suddenly froze. It was Aijia. Juan also saw it, and his heart turned cold. He felt a little numb and bitter, an indescribable feeling. A moment later, she said in a low voice, "Take it." Chinemo didn't pick it up immediately. Instead, he stared at Juan's eyes. "Do you care about her very much?" Juan didn't answer the question. Sometimes, some questions didn't need to be said a few times. If a man cared about you, he wouldn't make you feel wronged or afraid. It wasn't that Juan didn't have confidence, but Aijia's intention was very obvious. However, Chinemo insisted on keeping her by his side. This was a time bomb for their marriage. Chapter 4273. Juan had thought about reconciling with him. They were in a good relationship now, and it was only a matter of time before they got married again. However, this was a relationship that had yet to be mended. Now that it was being attacked by another woman, Juan didn't think she had the energy to fight. She didn't want to fight. What she wanted was Chinmo's self-awareness. Obviously he didn't. His way of comforting her was not on point. Even if he and Aijia had never slept together, even if the child wasn't his, he had accompanied her. This was definitely not a relationship between an artist and a boss. Moreover, they didn't have a contract before this. As they were talking, Aijia called again. This time Chinemo picked up. Aijia's voice was a little messy, and her breathing was rapid. "Chinemo, I had a dream. I dreamed of him." Chinemo closed his eyes. "It was just a dream." "No, it was very real. I dreamed that Chin Lu was by my side. I dreamed that he was really alive. Our child was also really alive." Aijia's voice was a little out of control. "Chinemo, I want to go find him. I really feel that he's still alive. He's still here." Chinemo listened quietly. His voice was unusually calm and cruel. Listen to me. Qin Lu is no longer here. Ai Jia. We saw it with our own eyes. He knew that she was at the hotel, so he hung up and asked the doctor to go over. He had to rush over himself. He put down the phone and turned to look at He Huan. His voice was very soft. He Huan, actually Qin Chen is a twin. One of them stayed in America and was adopted by an important person. His name is Qin Lu. He has always known about his background. He looks very similar to me. Occasionally, when I go to America, we go for a drink or two. Ai Jia is his girlfriend. They were supposed to get married and Ai Jia is pregnant. He paused before continuing in a slightly suppressed voice. A few years ago, when you were pregnant, I went to America. Unfortunately, there was a terrorist attack. Qin Lu was the commander of that attack. He could have escaped unscathed, but in the end, he was blown up by a stray bullet in order to save me. There was no way for him to come back. He Huan was stunned. Qin Mo smiled bitterly. Ai Jia was his girlfriend. Later on, she had a miscarriage. I accompanied her. That's all our relationship is. After a few years, she probably hasn't recovered from her psychological injury. She might be living like a normal person, but she's living in the past. She thinks that Qin Lu isn't dead. At this moment, He Huan was especially calm. She curled up and sat quietly for a while before whispering, Qin Mo, open the car door and I'll go upstairs. I won't stop you if you want to go now, but you have to think carefully. Did Ai Jia mistake you for Qin Lu? If so, think carefully about your choice. She looked up at him. I can't live in the shadows of others forever. I'm not that great. Even if I know about the land of Qin, it's the same. Let's just say that I'm selfish. Qin Mo's fingers clenched the steering wheel, and he couldn't say a word. In the end, he opened the car door and handed her the house keys. His voice was a little hoarse. I'll come back early. He Huan didn't say anything but smiled faintly. She had only taken a few steps out of the car when Qin Mo followed her out. He Huan. She turned her head. He walked over to her with a jacket in his hand and draped it over her shoulders. It's cold at night. Don't catch a cold. She looked at him fixedly, unable to say a word. Chapter 4274. Qin Mo buttoned her buttons one by one before taking a closer look at her. He then said hoarsely, I'll be back soon. Trust me, okay? He gazed deeply at her as he spoke. He Huan felt as though she had fallen into an abyss. She couldn't escape even if she wanted to. She knew that she shouldn't be soft-hearted. She couldn't agree to his request. But when she looked at him, her heart softened. It was because of him, not because of him and Ai Jia. He Huan knew this very well. He Huan suddenly said, I'll go with you. Under the lights, Qin Mo looked surprised. You're going too? Didn't you say that you are in a normal relationship with her? Why can't I go? Speaking of which, I'm her future sister-in-law. He Huan smiled faintly. At this moment her mentality had changed. If she gave up on Qin Mo, it would be like giving him to Ai Jia. Why would she let her have it for free? She was clearly a hypocrite. What did she mean by treating Qin Mo as Qin Lu and saying that Qin Lu was still alive? Who was she trying to fool? How could a woman who had gone through so much in the entertainment industry take things so hard? He Huan wouldn't believe it even if she died. But she didn't want to tell Qin Mo about it. A straight man wouldn't understand a hypocrite like her. Qin Mo looked at her deeply and said hoarsely, Okay, get in. He Huan followed him into the car. Qin Mo's hands were on the steering wheel. He paused for a moment before stepping on the accelerator. The car drove very fast. In less than half an hour, they arrived at Ai Jia's hotel. Qin Mo brought He Huan to the top floor and knocked on the door. About 10 seconds later, Ai Jia opened the door. Even though He Huan was mentally prepared to see her in a bathrobe and smell good, she couldn't resist the temptation. Ai Jia was only wearing a silk negligee that was as thin as a cicada's wings. It was faintly discernible, and He Huan was willing to bet that there was nothing underneath. Ai Jia's hair was let down and her makeup was a little off, but it made her look even more seductive. Not only He Huan, but even Qin Mo was surprised. Because it was inappropriate. Ai Jia looked at them and leaned his head against the door. He smiled faintly and seemed to be in a trance. He's still here. Qin Mo noticed that something was wrong with her expression. He was about to say something to He Huan when he turned his head and saw that He Huan's nose was bleeding. He Huan looked at Qin Mo helplessly. I didn't want to. I just couldn't help it. There was a hint of coquettishness in her tone, an emotion that He Huan rarely revealed. Qin Mo was actually quite tempted, but now was not the time to be tempted. He immediately said to Ai Jia, "Get me some tissues." Ai Jia was surprised and glanced at He Huan. He Huan smiled sheepishly at her. Sorry to bother you. Qin Mo insisted on coming. Ai Jia went to get a tissue and handed it to He Huan. Qin Mo took it and wiped the blood off He Huan's face. He held her with one arm and sat down on the sofa. After a long time, the bleeding finally stopped. He still blamed her. You're already a grown-up, but you still have a nosebleed. You're so useless. He Huan looked at him. It's a normal reaction. You're not a man. He knocked on her head. His tone was fierce, but there was a hint of affection in it. He Huan only smiled faintly. Look at Ai Jia. Did she take some medicine? I don't think she's right. Chapter 4275. Qin Mo then went to check on Ai Jia, only to see a bottle of sleeping pills on the table in front of Ai Jia. A few pills were spilled on the table. He frowned. Why did you take so many pills again? The doctor said it would affect your nerves greatly. Ai Jia chuckled softly and leaned on the sofa. She said carelessly, as long as I can think of him, I don't care. Ai Jia, Qin Lu is gone. Qin Mo's voice was a little tight. He would want you to live well. Is it the kind of life worse than death? Ai Jia suddenly hugged him. Her voice was low and humble. Qin Mo, don't ignore me. Otherwise, I won't be able to find Qin Lu's shadow in this world. I can't hold on to him. I'm afraid I'll forget him. I'm so scared, so scared. A mature, beautiful, sexy woman hugging her man would make any woman angry. He Huan was no exception. However, she had a nosebleed again. She was almost not angry anymore. She was angry and amused at the same time. This was clearly a scene in a movie. Why couldn't Qin Mo see it clearly? The lines were so old. Maybe Qin Mo enjoyed the poignant beauty of this scene. He Huan wiped her nosebleed and said, Qin Mo, should I leave first? You stay and comfort your sister-in-law. Ai Jia is right. You are the best gift God has left for her. She finished her words with a fake smile. Maybe people would say that she was heartless and didn't know how to sympathize. Sorry, He Huan was cold like this. She was an adult, but she didn't have any sense of propriety. She was sure that Ai Jia dressed like this to seduce Qin Mo. It was probably because of her appearance that Ai Jia was so ruthless. She just didn't expect that she would come with her. He Huan had just finished speaking when her eyes fell on a small trash can. There was a small package inside. She was surprised and shocked. Then she looked at Ai Jia. Ai Jia didn't look normal. Her face was abnormally red. He Huan thought that she had taken sleeping pills, but now he knew that she must have taken the village medicine herself. He Huan didn't point it out and didn't leave. However, Qin Mo did not know that. He walked over and patted Momo's little head. Didn't we agree? Just wait for the doctor to come and give her an injection. She often does this. Often. He Huan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Should she be glad that Qin Mo's willpower was strong enough? He actually hadn't succeeded yet. Ai Jia's village medicine was all for nothing. So she nodded obediently. Then I'll wait a little longer. It's just that my head is a little dizzy, and my nose is bleeding quite a bit. She rarely acted like a spoiled child. Qin Mo felt a little distressed. He lowered his head and kissed her. I'll ask Aunt Lan to cook something delicious for you when we get back. She hugged his neck and bit her lip. When can we go home? Qin Mo's heart was actually rippling. He wished he could grow a pair of wings and go home immediately, so he could hold this little vixen in his arms and dote on her. She was really tempting tonight, but they were in Ai Jia's apartment, so he couldn't do anything no matter how impulsive he was. At this moment, the doctor happened to come over. The doctor was an experienced doctor. At a glance, Ai Jia didn't look like she had taken sleeping pills. However, he couldn't say it out loud, so he just said, Make her vomit. You can only make her vomit. Ai Jia was also very uncomfortable at this moment. She couldn't care less about anything else. In the end, She vomited in a very embarrassing manner. She didn't even think about seducing him. Chapter 4276. Chinemo didn't say anything. He only sent the doctor away after Ai Jia was gone. Then he left with He Huan. After going out, He Huan looked at him. Are you going to take care of her like this forever? As long as she says that she's not feeling well, and Mrs. Qin Lu, you have to come over to hug her and comfort her. This time she's wearing a sling. What if it's in the bathroom next time? Are you going to take it all in? Chinemo looked at her. Why do you think so? He Huan walked in front of him and said, I don't believe that you don't know what medicine Ai Jia took today. Chinemo was speechless. He caught up with her and held her hand. He Huan, she said absent-mindedly. You know it, so I won't say it. Chinemo held her hand and suddenly pulled her into his arms. He didn't do anything, but just hugged her. He rested his chin on her thin shoulder and said in a hoarse voice, But it's true that Qin Lu died for me. It's also true that Ai Jia had a miscarriage. It's also true that I feel guilty all these years. He Huan didn't say anything. She just hugged him slowly and patted his back gently. Regarding Ai Jia, it seemed that they didn't need to talk much. Later, they went back to the apartment together. Auntie Lan was old, but she still got up to cook supper for the two little ones. She was an old lady, so she always talked more. Chinemo looked at He Huan while eating noodles and smiled faintly. He Huan put on a fake smile. Later, when they reached the bedroom, Chinemo asked for sex. He Huan refused and pushed him aside. I'm tired. She was like an insect. No one knew what she was thinking. Chinemo rolled to the side and watched as He Huan grabbed a set of pajamas and headed to the bathroom. She was still wearing the same vibrant gown. His gaze was a little deep as he leaned against the headboard and smoked a cigarette. Then he got off the bed and followed her to the bathroom. He used some forceful methods on her. An hour later, he came out with He Huan in his arms. His face was full of satisfaction. He Huan was a little angry, but he was no match for Chinemo. Later on, he reluctantly refused and gave in twice. Even so, Chinemo still felt very different from before. When it was over, Chinemo let out a sigh of relief and lowered his head to look at the little fellow who had been bullied miserably by him. He Huan was a little angry, but he didn't say anything. He smiled. Angry again? Didn't you feel good just now? As he spoke, his voice was clearly hoarse, low and hoarse. It hurts. This time, He Huan turned her body away and did not look at him. He was really too hateful, always doing as he pleased in bed. Chinemo smiled generously and chased after her to kiss her thin shoulders. As they kissed, he couldn't restrain himself anymore. He Huan seemed to have felt it. She said faintly, You've had enough. If you want more, you'll have to think of your own way. I want to sleep. Chinemo found it a little funny and kissed her again. Then how about I take you, okay? He Huan turned her head and glared at him. Chinemo chuckled. Just sleep. I'll do it myself. He Huan pressed against his chest. Don't you have any shame? Her cute look made his heart soften. He hugged her waist. I'll take you to shower. You can't sleep like this. He Huan's eyes were half closed. Her little head was in his arms. Her voice was like a kitten. No, I just want to sleep. Later, she was afraid that he would mess around again, so she simply hugged his neck. Chapter 4277. It was a wonderful feeling to have a soft girl hugging him in the middle of the night. She was the girl he had liked since he was a child. Chinmo's voice was very soft, as if he was afraid of waking her up. Have you forgiven me? You're not angry anymore? He Huan's voice came from his arms. I didn't say that. I'm still angry. Chinemo had an indescribable feeling in his heart. He reached out and rubbed her little head. Then I'll do it until I'm not angry anymore, okay? He Huan still hugged him, feeling that he was letting him off too easily. He knew how to do this. She was a little angry and leaned over to bite his neck again. Chinemo was also quite speechless. You've become a puppy again. You only know how to bite. He Huan didn't say anything and just hugged him. In fact, her nerves were a little tense, but after a while, she strangely fell asleep. Her palm-sized face was buried in his neck, and her breath was also warm. It was itchy and hot, but it was the best temperature that Chinemo had ever felt. He reached out and touched her face gently with his fingers. The soft touch made his heart skip a beat. In fact, although Juan was still fierce, he could feel the change in her. She had clearly softened, and she clearly liked him. It turned out that the feeling of being liked was so wonderful. Chinemo was in a very good mood, and fell asleep in extreme exhaustion. The next morning Juan woke up. Her body felt as if it had been run over by a car the night before. As soon as she woke up, she felt that someone was restlessly touching her. She was a little annoyed and kicked him. "You're so annoying." Chinemo chuckled and leaned over to kiss her. "Aren't you going to see City today?" Juan pulled the quilt over her head and ignored him. Chinemo could only hug her. "Are we going to pick up Juan?" "You." She couldn't breathe being hugged by him like this, so she got out of the quilt and looked at him for a long time. "I want to go back to my mother's house." Chinemo stared into her eyes and pondered. "Well, let's go to pick up Juan first, and then we'll go to your house together." Juan was rather speechless. "I mean, I'll go back alone." As she spoke, she lifted the quilt and stared at him. "Chinemo, you should know that my mom doesn't like you right now. Why are you still getting close to her?" She was going to change her clothes, but he was still lying on the bed. He seemed to chuckle softly, then said, "You don't know why I went up to you?" Juan was already in the changing room, and his voice drifted over. "You have a lot of dark history, and now you have AI. I can understand you, but my mom really won't. She will only sympathize with you. Chinemo, you have to understand this." As she spoke, Hisei walked out and leaned against the door looking at him. She picked a simple black t-shirt and a gauze skirt of the same color. She was very thin, and her features were exquisite. She was dressed very beautifully. Although Juan wasn't a super beauty, and she was too small and skinny, in Chinmo's eyes, she was unique, especially the feeling of hugging her was super good. He looked at her eagerly, and after a while he said, "I know. So I'd better go back by myself." Juan glanced at him, and went to the bathroom. When she was brushing her teeth, Chinemo came over, and hugged her waist from behind. Juan pursed her lips. "Chinemo, what are you doing?" Chapter 4278. He leaned against her warm neck and said in a low and husky voice, "Juan, will you go on a blind date?" Juan was brushing her teeth. Hearing his words, she brushed hard a few times, and there were still bubbles in her mouth. "Yes." What a cruel little thing. He didn't know if he was angry or happy. He opened his mouth and bit her neck. At first, Juan didn't know what he was doing. After a while, she understood his sinister intention. She closed her eyes and said, "Chinemo, can you not be so childish? Go and smash my car again. I don't care," he said in a low voice, "but you're not allowed to go on a blind date." As he said that, he looked at the bite mark in blue with satisfaction. "Last night, you were still tossing and turning on my bed. Have you forgotten that you look like a little wild cat?" Juan spat and frowned. "It's not the first time for you to do something like this, Chinemo." He was so angry that he bit her again. Juan whined, "If you bite me again, you'll really become a puppy." Chinemo turned her around and pressed her against the counter. He said seriously, "There's a constraint between us now, huh?" Juan looked at him quietly and stopped joking after a while. "Do you want to hear the truth?" Chinemo didn't say anything. He just held his breath a little longer. Juan lowered her eyes and smiled faintly. "Actually, what I want is very simple. I've said that I can't tolerate AIG's matter all the time. Even if I can, I have to think about my parents." She looked at him and wanted to say something, but she stopped him. "Chinemo, don't say that love is between two people. It's not like that. At least it's not between two people. We still have Aijia and Rongyu. You may think it's unfair, but think about it. Rongyu and I will never meet in a hotel in private like you do. Chinemo, to be honest, I don't feel safe at all. I can bear it, but it doesn't mean that I'm willing to let my mother worry about me. So I really can't promise you now. I can accompany you to see her once or twice, but I can't be with you all the time. Think about it, I have a lot of things to do. If one day you can't bear it, I don't think I can bear it. So instead of waiting now, that's not possible." Chinmo's voice was firm. "I don't have that kind of feelings for her." Juan just smiled. With that kind of figure and style, even a woman would be tempted, let alone a man. Chinamo. I'm just saying that if you keep taking care of her like this and rush to her side with just a phone call, I don't think we can be your wife. I don't want to see my husband going around other women all the time. It's the same with Chin Lu's woman. When Chin Lu passed away, Dad and Mom should be the most sad. It's you, not Ai Jia. I can't see how sad she is. I only see her trying to seduce you and treat you as a substitute. After saying that, she smiled again. Sorry, I've always been straightforward. I don't know how to beat around the bush. Chinemo looked at her and asked softly after a long time, Is this what you really think? Yihuan smiled faintly. Chinemo closed his eyes. What if Ai Jia has a mental illness? Split, right? Yihuan was still unmoved. Sorry, she still needs to be treated. It's not something that can be cured just by being with her. You will only spoil her, and even allow her to hurt others. Chapter 4279. Chinemo frowned and said, Yihuan, aren't you being a little cruel? She's Chin Lu's girlfriend. Yihuan wasn't surprised by his attitude at all. She lowered her eyes and said calmly, Maybe I'm being cruel. Chinemo, I'm just saying what I think. If you think I'm being cruel or inconsiderate, then forget it. She was really going to leave after she said that. Chinemo grabbed her arm and frowned. Yihuan. Yihuan smiled and said, You didn't ask yesterday, and it was too late. I didn't want to quarrel with you. Now that I've made it clear, it's up to you. Chinmo's fingers grabbed her tightly, but he let go after a while and frowned. Yihuan, it's not what you think. I know. That's why I don't quarrel with you. I understand to a certain extent, she said with a smile. Chinemo, you can't ask too much of me. Just treat it as me being selfish. As she said that, she broke free from his hand and walked to the door without hesitation. Chinemo locked her down again. This time she was pinned against the door. He used the innate advantage of being a man and a woman to trap her. His voice was hoarse. Yihuan, you're being unreasonable. Yihuan was trapped like this. She struggled for a while and then stopped. He wouldn't do anything in broad daylight. She raised her chin and said, If I'm being unreasonable, do you think I could still come back with you last night, talk to you nicely and... She turned her face to the side and felt a little hot. But she continued, Can I still do it with you? Chinemo smiled and touched her burning face with his fingers. His voice was so deep that it made her blush, and her heart beat faster. Am I the only one who wants to do it? Huan, you want it too. He usually called her Yihuan and rarely called her Huan. But every time he called her that, he was aroused. Yihuan looked at him with a straight face, surprised and a little shocked. Meanwhile, Chinemo began to kiss her. He kissed her gently, as if he was touching a precious treasure. Unwilling to be kissed by him, Yihuan turned her face away. Don't do this every time. But you really like it, don't you? Chinmo's voice was filled with laughter. Yihuan, on the other hand, couldn't smile. She only felt sad. She let him kiss her and asked softly, Chinemo, you mean that you still want to take care of her, don't you? He didn't stop kissing her. After a while he whispered, I promise I won't be alone with her when you're not around, okay? Yihuan turned around and looked at him. Her gaze was very focused. Chinemo felt that Yihuan had never looked at him so seriously before. He just let her look at him and looked into her eyes. After a long time, Yihuan finally said in a low voice, Chinemo, if you really want to be a hero, then forget it. I'm serious. She wasn't being impulsive. She had been thinking about it for the whole night. A few years ago, Rongyu and Ai Jia were standing between them. A few years later, Rongyu woke up and she was relieved, but Ai Jia was still standing between them. She was a little angry at first, but she realized that she could never be a woman like Ai Jia. Perhaps Yihuan also knew how to use tricks. She was forcing Chinemo to make a choice. She didn't care about the result. Just like she said, she was selfish. Chapter 4280. Yes. Her smile was a little bitter. Chinemo, your tender feelings for the fairer sex will only hurt everyone, including me. I'm just protecting myself now. She took a deep breath. Let's calm down first. Yihuan still left. Chinemo stood alone in the washroom. He said that Ai Jia was mentally ill. He didn't tell Yihuan that the separation of life and death had also left a shadow in his heart. That was why he indulged Aijia. Or perhaps Aijia's existence would remind him repeatedly that the land of Qin really existed. Qinemo stood for a long time before he went out. Yihuan was still there. She was eating breakfast. He sat opposite her and looked at her. "I'll drive you later." "No need. I'll take a taxi to the venue and drive the car away." Yihuan looked down. "Qinemo, I'm serious. Please think about it. If you marry Aijia one day, consider whether I'll raise Yihuan. You know what I mean?" Yihuan. He suddenly gritted his teeth. "You can continue. I can't guarantee that you can walk out of here. You're just bluffing." Yihuan looked down. She just ate her breakfast and didn't say anything else to him. Later, he drove her to the venue to get her car. Yihuan sat in her car while Qinemo sat beside her. She lowered the window. He bent down. "You really don't want to think about it? Calm down." Yihuan smiled faintly. "You should think about it. Do you want to stay with me, or continue to comfort Aijia?" Qinemo stared at her for a few seconds. He straightened his body but didn't say anything in the end. Yihuan smiled at him and drove the car away. As for Qinemo, he just stood there quietly for a long time. Yihuan drove and looked at the rearview mirror from time to time. She saw that Qinemo was still there. She didn't relent. Because she was a woman. Once he gave way, there would be nothing left. No matter what happened between her and Qinemo in the future, it was between her and Qinemo. It should not be changed by Aijia's appearance. Yihuan really could not sympathize with a woman like Aijia. Moreover, after sensing that the woman had ulterior motives, she would not be so generous. Yihuan's mood was a little complicated. When she returned home, she was still a little absent-minded. Suqing was also an experienced person. Besides, she had heard about what happened between Yihuan and Qinemo, so she asked, "Have you really forgiven Qinemo? You want to start over?" Yihuan looked at the rice in her bowl and thought for a moment. "I haven't decided yet." Suqing sighed in a low voice. "When your father said that he didn't agree with you too, it was also because he was angry at Qinemo at that time. But now, if you two are really together, and he treats you well, you may consider it. But I only have one request." Yihuan looked up. Suqing said in a low voice, "This time, you must think about remarrying. Don't think about it for at least 2 years. It doesn't matter if you live together or have sex. Anyway, we were husband and wife. If you have a child, we can help you raise it. But Yihuan, don't let me take that piece of paper home easily." Yihuan's eyes were a little misty. She suddenly understood why her mother said that. She pursed her lips and whispered after a long time, "Mom, I know." Suqing was also in a trance for a moment. Then she whispered, "Actually, Qinemo is not bad. It's hard to find someone as good as him." Chapter 4281. She said it in a low voice, but Yihuan heard it clearly. She felt a little sad. She knew that her mother was very open-minded when it came to relationships. This time, she spoke up for Qinemo, because she was worried that Yihuan wouldn't be able to find a good man. She was also worried about her own future. She thought that she didn't want to give in to Aijia partly because of herself, and partly because of her parents. Her mother and father were old. They didn't have many children like the Qin family did. They only had one child. If she wasn't happy, they wouldn't be happy. How could they have a happy old age? So, she let Qinemo make the decision. She didn't tell Suqing about it, because she knew her mother's temper. If she knew, she wouldn't let her be with Qinemo again. She was partial to Qinemo, and hoped to be with Qinemo. She knew it very well. Yihuan didn't say much and just nodded. Seeing that Yihuan understood, Suqing didn't make it difficult for her. She hadn't seen her for a month and naturally missed her. Apart from delicious food, she also prepared a lot of Yihuan's favorite food. At 3 in the afternoon, Yihuan couldn't stand it anymore, and said that she wanted to go back to read her script. "You only know how to work. Your script." Suqing was a little dissatisfied. "Look at other women of your age. What are they doing? They dress up nicely, go shopping, drink tea, play cards, and so on." Then, she looked at Yihuan's dress with disdain. "It's rare for you to wear a dress, and it's so black. Let me tell you, men are visual animals. There are a lot of vixens out there nowadays. You have to be careful. especially since Chin Mo sees female stars every day. Each of them is prettier than the other, and each of them is more revealing than the other. Yihuan pretended to smile. I don't think they're revealing as much as me. Sucheng was speechless. Don't talk back to me. Yihuan picked up an apple. Think about it. Chen Chen dresses up as a man every day, but she still keeps Lan Yu under control. Lan Yu is crazy about her. Sucheng smirked coldly. Lan Yu used to be an artist, right? He had some special hobbies, but Chin Mo doesn't. Anyway, you'd better be more careful. Since you're free today, I'll take you to pick out some clothes that you can wear. Don't keep dressing like a high school student. Don't think about it. You're a woman in your early 30s now. Women at your age need to be graceful, understand? As Sucheng said that, she flipped her hair. Naturally, it was beautiful. Yihuan imitated Su Chen's actions and felt as though her eyes were about to cramp up. She said that she was not suitable. Su Chen snorted. You're not born with it. Just learn and you'll get it. Remember, you're a woman. I think a couple should look inside. Yihuan was still trying to convince her. Sucheng didn't mind. TSK, both inside and outside are important. You only have the inside but not the outside. Why would a man be interested in knowing what's inside? Yihuan didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but thinking that she hadn't spent time with her mother for a long time, she decided to go with Sucheng. Sucheng took Yihuan to the best shopping mall in B City, and to the best brands. The He family wasn't short of money, and Yihuan was rich herself. She could totally afford these brands. But looking at the rows of clothes, Yihuan was speechless. Mom, it's awkward to dress like this. Sucheng looked at her. How is it awkward? We have to be more formal when we go out to eat. Otherwise, Chin Mo will treat you like a child. He won't, Yihuan muttered. Chapter 4282. As she said that, Sucheng smiled thoughtfully and looked at her. You said that Chin Mo doesn't treat you like a child, so you have to treat yourself like a woman. Yihuan didn't say anything, and let Sucheng pick out some clothes for her. Sucheng was very sensitive to fashion, so naturally she had good taste. After a while, she picked out a few sets of clothes for Yihuan to try on. After Yihuan tried them on, they were indeed not bad, but they were too restrictive. Mom, I don't usually wear them, Yihuan couldn't help but say. Sucheng looked at her. You won't be filming all year round, right? If you're going to be Mrs. Chin with Chin Mo in the future, you'll have to socialize, right? When you're by Chin Mo's side, people have to think that you're Mrs. Chin, not just a little assistant. Yihuan disagreed. Mom, I'm a director too. Why do I have to be Chin Mo's wife? Why can't people say that Chin Mo is my husband? Sucheng smiled faintly and reached out to caress Yihuan's head. After a while she said, because you are in the entertainment industry. You know that resources are important in this industry. Yihuan didn't say anything. Actually, her mom was right. No matter how successful the show she directed was, as long as she and Chin Mo went out, he would always be the main focus. This was something that she could not change no matter what she did. Yihuan also smiled bitterly. Sucheng could understand her feelings and patted her arm. Actually, it's not a conflict, Huan. Women can balance their career and family, just like men sometimes give a woman face. Looking at her mother, Yihuan suddenly bit her lip and asked softly, Really? Of course. Look at how much your father respects me. Also, your father-in-law used to be so domineering. In front of Liang Qiu, he's like a house cat. Actually, his temper used to be worse than Chin Mo's. Sucheng lowered her voice. And he's not very clean. He likes women. Yihuan chuckled. In reality, she knew that her mother-in-law, Yi Liangqiu, had been very powerful and resourceful back then. Even a playboy like Qin Anlin had been completely subdued by her. So a man will respect a woman if he loves her. Sucheng said softly. Marriage needs to be managed. Even if you and Chin Mo get together, you can't be away from home all year round. Which man can bear to see his wife only once or twice? He can't bear it just physically. To be fair, Chin Mo had been very obedient in the past few years. He had been waiting until Yihuan didn't cause any scandals. Yihuan didn't say anything after hearing her words. Sucheng asked the shopping assistant to wrap up the clothes she tried on just now. She was about to swipe her credit card when Huan came back to her senses and said, "Just buy 1 or 2 sets. I can't wear so many." Su-ching looked at her. "Look at how petty you are. These clothes are nothing." She seemed to have thought of something. "You and Chinemo didn't see each other for the past few years. Did he provide for you?" "I have my own money. Besides, I can take care of the whole family," Huan couldn't help but say. She wasn't trying to exonerate Chinemo, but they didn't get along very well back then. She had left not long after giving birth to Huan. She had never talked about raising a family, because Huan had never lacked money. She remembered that when Chinemo went to the United States for a business trip, he went to her apartment once. Her apartment in the United States wasn't big. It was only about 100 square meters. He stayed there for 2 days, and probably wasn't satisfied. So he replaced all the furniture in her apartment with new ones. He also seemed to have bought a bunch of clothes and placed them in the closet. Chapter 4283. Back then, she was still young, so Chinemo had bought her clothes for girls. However, Huan had never worn them before, and they were still in her apartment in America. Thinking about it, she felt that she had not been good to him all those years. Of course, she did not regret it. She was not a soft-hearted person, because it was not all her fault. Seeing that she was not saying anything, Su-ching dragged her to the next store to pick out clothes. After going back and forth several times, they bought about a dozen sets. Huan suspected that Su-ching's card was about to be maxed out. She could not help but say, "Mom, will Dad think that you are a spendthrift when he receives the bill?" Su-ching glanced at her. "I don't rely on your father's money to live." Huan felt that her mother was quite domineering. She was small and did not earn money, but she was fierce. Su-ching asked the chauffeur to leave the clothes in the car, and then dragged Huan to a high-end lingerie store. She forced Huan to try on a few sets of lingerie, as well as a few sexy silk pajamas, suspenders, and lace. Huan refused to buy them, but Su-ching paid the bill without hesitation. She said, "If necessary, we still need to have fun as husband and wife." She swiped her card and finally handed a stack of bills to Huan. "You can report this to Chinemo. Spend as much of his money as you can in the future. Even if you are not husband and wife now, he will always chase after you. You two are sleeping together, right? This money is spent on him." Huan did not know whether to laugh or cry, but she actually felt that it made sense. After he was done, he carried the bags himself. He couldn't let the chauffeur carry them. After all, they were private items. Seeing that it was getting late, Su-ching suggested that they eat out together. Thinking that they were going to see City the next day, Huan nodded and said yes. After this meeting, she would not be back for at least a month. However, they did not expect to run into the Qin family when they ate together. Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu were eating out with Huan and Chinemo. The atmosphere was strange, especially when Huan looked at Chinemo. "Dad, didn't you say that Mom is in Sea City?" The atmosphere was even more strange. Huan was stunned for a moment. She went over and picked up Huan. "Mom came back last minute. Isn't she here to see Huan now?" Huan replied with an "oh," and looked at her eagerly. Huan smiled again and kissed her. Then, he turned to look at Su-ching with a pleading look in his eyes. Su-ching understood what she meant. Moreover, she wasn't cold-hearted. She also loved Huan dearly. Su-ching immediately pulled out a chair for Su-ching. Huan sat beside him. The atmosphere was very harmonious. Chinemo immediately pulled out a chair for Su-ching and arranged for Huan to sit beside him. The atmosphere was very harmonious. Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu were still a little nervous. After all, it was their son's fault. They did not expect Chinemo to regret it so quickly. They also knew Su-ching's character. She would not give in easily. At this time, it was not easy for everyone to sit together and eat together. They also used their eyes to signal their son to cherish this opportunity. If he messed up again, or hit his wife in the future, they wouldn't care anymore. Because everyone was around Huan, the atmosphere was very harmonious. After dinner, Chinemo took the initiative to send Su-ching and Huan home. Huan wanted to tag along, but it was already past 9 o'clock, and the little girl should be asleep, so she didn't go. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Follow You Read Literature on WeChat, chatting about life and looking for a bosom friend. Chapter 4284. Chin-mo sent Su-chung and Hee-hwan to the parking lot. Su-chung suddenly said, "The chauffeur's car is in front. Chin-mo, you can send Hee-hwan home." As she said that, she put the bag in Hee-hwan's hand. "Sleep early tonight. We still have to go to Sea City tomorrow." Hee-hwan was surprised. "Mom, I'll stay at your place." Su-chung smiled. "Forget it." She touched her daughter's face with her fingers and sighed. "I want to keep you as you were when you were young, but you've grown up. Hee-hwan, your father and I are old. Come home to visit us more often." Hee-hwan suddenly felt a little sad and didn't know what to say. It seemed that all these years, because of her and Chin-mo, her parents hadn't really been happy. Only then did Hee-hwan realize that she wasn't the only one sad in this world. She was sad about this fact. In the end, she didn't say anything and just hugged Su-chung. She said softly, "Mom, I'll be fine." Su-chung was usually the fiercest, but at this moment, she was really choking up. She lowered her voice and said, "Hee-hwan, you have to make yourself happy." She paused and said with a slightly depressed voice, "Your father and I have tasted everything we should in this life. We just hope that you can also." She didn't say the rest of the sentence, but Hee-hwan should understand. After saying that, Su-chung gently pushed Hee-hwan away. "Sleep early." Then she got into the car. Hee-hwan stood there and watched the car slowly drive away. She still felt a little sad. "Mom, it's rare." Chin-mo had been standing beside her. She didn't move, so he didn't rush her. He just slowly went over and hugged her from behind. His voice was a little hoarse. "I'll send you home." As he said that, he took the bag in her hand. However, when he took it, he glanced at it and was a little surprised. Then he looked at her. As for Hee-hwan, she didn't notice the look in Chin-mo's eyes. She was still immersed in her sadness. When she came back to herself, she was already in Chin-mo's car. She blinked and asked, "Where are we going?" "To send you home," said Chin-mo lightly. Then he casually asked, "To go shopping?" Hee-hwan nodded absent-mindedly. Then, she seemed to recall something and looked at Chin-mo. "Oh, I don't think you've ever given me pocket money." Chin-mo was focused on driving, but a faint smile appeared on his lips. "Why did you think of this?" Hee-hwan thought for a moment and said, "I'll tell you later." He was still smiling. "In the morning, you were so cruel to draw a line between us. Why do you want to pay for the family support now? Pocket money, all right. It's not money for the family at all," she muttered in a low voice. Chin-mo said. "How said, Chin-chung, Emo, Emo-chung, Chung." Hwan-zin said. Su-chung stopped the car. "What's the difference?" Hee-hwan's heart was beating fast because of his teasing. However, she pretended to be calm and coughed. "It's different." Then she didn't look at him. She turned her head to look out of the car window and said to herself, "Pocket money is pocket money." Chin-mo looked at the way she turned her head. She looked so cute. Suddenly, he felt that Hee-hwan was different. She was softer than before. He wasn't someone with low EQ. He understood it after some thought. Because Hee-hwan had him in her heart, she didn't leave like before. Now she had something to worry about. 2 movie tickets for Avengers 4. Only $2.58 buy 2 tickets. Only after you collect them. Method of collection. Open your Alipay account on your phone. Enter the password. Yao Yao is sending movie tickets. Chapter 4285. Chin-mo's heart instantly softened. He gazed at her for a long time and couldn't help reaching out to caress her face. His voice was hoarse. "Hee-hwan, we can talk about this when we get home." Hee-hwan was still looking out the window and ignored him. She didn't slap his fingers away either. Chin-mo liked her, but he had never felt such tenderness before. He wanted to be more intimate, but the green light turned green. He chuckled and started the car. The car finally stopped outside her apartment. Chin-mo had been here before, but he had never gone up, let alone spent the night there. Hee-hwan held her bag silently. "Good night." She had only moved a little when her arm was caught by him. Chin Mo turned his body sideways and said in a hoarse voice, "You want to leave just like that?" She turned her head and stared at him with her small, full lips pressed into a straight line. Chin Mo held the steering wheel with one hand and rubbed his chin with the other. He smiled. "Didn't you want to ask me for pocket money?" His gaze landed on the bag in her hand. It was very clear. Huan was sure that she saw a hint of evil in his eyes. She bit her lower lip. "Not now." Chin Mo chuckled and changed the topic. "Oh yeah, what did you buy today?" She was so embarrassed that she didn't dare to show him the things in her hand. She thought about it and stuffed all the bills in his hand. "Look at it yourself." Chin Mo was amused. Then he took it and looked at it. He didn't know much about women's products, but he knew a little about the top brands. He could tell that she had lost a lot of money, and it was all with Uncle Kim's card. He said casually, "How can you use your parents' money when you're married?" "I'm divorced," Huan said unhappily. She couldn't leave now because he was still holding her hand and not letting her go. Chin Mo saw the last bill and his smile deepened. He looked at her and said, "Why are there only a few bags left?" "The driver took them first," Huan said unhappily. Chin Mo nodded. "That's true. You have to be careful with your underwear." As soon as he finished speaking, Huan suddenly met his eyes. He was smiling, and there was an inexplicable meaning in his smile. Thus, Huan knew that he had been teasing her all along. She pulled her hand away. "I'm going home." "Wait." Chin Mo called her. Disappointed, Huan's eyes met his. Then, he smiled faintly and took out a checkbook. He wrote 2 million and put it in her palm. "Take this back to your mother." He took out an envelope from the cabinet and gave it to her. "I'll transfer 2 million yuan to you every month. It's pocket money now, but it can be used to support the family in the future." Huan looked at the card, and then at him. He bit his lips and said, "It's not enough." Huan was at him. He made her starve to death. Chin Mo's smile deepened, and his eyes became gentle. He reached out and stroked her short hair. It was fluffy and cute. His voice suddenly became hoarse. "I know." Huan looked at him with tears in her eyes and got out of the car quietly. Chapter 4286. When they stood in the elevator together, he couldn't help but press her against the elevator wall and kiss her. Huan passively accepted his kiss. Her fingers clenched and loosened, and the bag in her hand fell to the ground. But no one was in the mood to care about it. He couldn't help but deepen the kiss, from a gentle peck on the corner of her mouth to a fierce kiss. Chin Mo rarely hid his desire like this. The veins on his forehead almost popped out. It wouldn't look good if he was aroused, so he had been restraining himself. But now he couldn't care so much. He even wanted to hug her in the elevator. He kissed her ferociously. Her small body was squeezed between him and the elevator wall, and her bones were hurting from the kiss. She didn't have time to care that she had been brought into the whirlpool. After a long time, Chin Mo finally let go of her. She was the person he cherished, and he wouldn't really do anything to her here. As soon as he let go, Huan's body slid down. Her fingers immediately pressed against the elevator wall for support. Her face was slightly red, and her eyes were full of moisture. Her red lips were slightly opened. She looked a little intoxicated. Chin Mo's fingers gently touched her lips, and he said in a low voice, "Huan, you make me feel so accomplished." He kissed her again, and then squatted down to pick up the bags for her. Huan's face turned red again. After entering the apartment, she watched Chin Mo sit on the sofa and felt a little embarrassed. "I'll help you get some water." She turned to leave, but his strong arm wrapped around her from behind, and then she fell into his arms. "Stay with me." His lips were pressed against her neck, and his breath was hot. Huan sat on his lap and quietly untied his hand on her waist. "We just talked this morning." He smelled the delicate fragrance of the meat and chuckled. "I thought you would let me." She didn't let him say that word. She quickly turned around in his arms and bit his lips. "Don't say it." Chin Mo looked at her and suddenly remembered what happened in the car. He suppressed the desire in his body and coaxed her patiently. "So you asked me to come here because you really want to start with me?" Huan bit her lip and didn't dare to look into his eyes. She hugged him shamelessly and rested her burning face on his shoulder. "I don't know." It was rare for her to be like this. She was lovable and seductive at the same time. At least Chinemo liked it. They had known each other for a long time, and she rarely acted like a spoiled child, let alone taking the initiative to hug him. He purposely whispered in her ear, "Aren't you afraid that I'll eat you up?" The big bad wolf transformed. Yihuan hugged him tightly for a while. Then, she lowered her head carefully in his arms and covered one of her eyes. She glanced at him and hugged him tightly again. The big bad wolf had transformed. "You can't feel it?" Chinemo deliberately teased her. It was very easy for a mature man like him to flirt with a woman, especially a relatively simple woman like Yihuan. He knew that she had only been filming abroad all these years, and her private life was very simple. Otherwise, he wouldn't have allowed her to stay abroad for so many years. Yihuan hugged him and didn't dare to move, but after a while, she felt him pressing her against him. That feeling was extremely shameful, more shameful than if he really did anything. Chapter 4287. Chinemo chuckled. "I don't want to drink water." Then he added, "Coward. Why are you so scared? It's not like we haven't done it before." Although he said that, he loosened his grip a little. Yihuan immediately jumped away like a cat whose tail had been stepped on and whimpered. Chinemo smiled happily. "Go get the water. I'll look around." Yihuan looked at him strangely, and then jumped away. Chinemo looked around. The apartment was luxurious but simple. There was nothing extra. It was like a model room. He looked inside and out and did not see anything that belonged to a man, so he was satisfied. When he came out again, Yihuan had already poured him a glass of water. She was sitting on the sofa with the remote control. She seemed to be watching TV and changing channels. He was sure that her attention was not on the TV. He was amused. Actually, his Yihuan was quite cute. He sat down and drank half a glass of water. He couldn't help but pull her into his arms and kiss her for a while. Then they watched TV together absent-mindedly. Then they kissed again, like miserable teenagers. They did things that they did not do when they were in their 20s. They relived the memories of young love. Of course, a mature man would not be satisfied with this. Later, he carried her into the master bedroom, along with the sensual pajamas she had bought. That night, Yihuan changed into a few sets. President Qin admired her and worked hard. Yes, he was also very satisfied. When everything calmed down, he grabbed little Jiachio in his arms and chuckled against the slightly sweaty skin on the back of her neck. "You've learned bad things from Huan." Yihuan was hugged from behind. She was exhausted, but at this moment, her mind was extremely clear. She asked him in a low voice, "Don't you like it?" He smiled and took a small bite. "How can I not like it? I love it so much." He wanted to show how much he liked it again, but Yihuan turned around and hugged him. "I still have to go to Sea City tomorrow. I have to be early." "Chinemo, stop it. My bones are going to break." He put down his hand that was on her shoulder and kissed her forehead gently. "Go to sleep. I'll drive you tomorrow morning." Yihuan thought that he would drive her to the airport, but not only did he drive her to the airport, but he also sent her all the way to Sea City and the hotel. She didn't have to worry about anything and just fell asleep. By breakfast time, she was much better. At least she was not as tired. He had been merciful last night. Yihuan got out of the car and looked at him. "You should eat some too." Yihuan got out and said, "You don't have to send me if you have a meeting. I can do it myself." It would have been better if he hadn't mentioned it. Now that he mentioned it, Yihuan felt upset. "You don't have to send me off if you have a meeting." He took a step forward and said in a voice that no one else could hear, "I can't bear to." As he spoke, he stretched out a finger and scratched her little face. "I don't want you to work so hard for the film, but I know you like it. Anyway, take care of yourself. I'll come over this weekend, okay?" Yihuan nodded obediently. Yihuan was not a person who showed her emotions. She didn't love Chinemo that much in the past. She had been moved for a while, but it soon faded because of Ai Jia. But now, she really cared about him. Yihuan was not a person who showed her emotions on her face. She had never loved Chinemo that much in the past. She had fallen for him for a while, but her feelings had quickly faded away because of Ai Jia. Now, however, she had fallen in love with him. Chapter 4288. At this moment, he felt even more reluctant. She had warned him fiercely before, but now she was not like her at all. Huan bit her lips and looked at him weakly. Chinemo bent down and kissed her on the lips. Stop biting or it'll bleed. Director don't look at me like that, or else, he chuckled. You won't have any prestige in the crew anymore. She was like a little girl in love. President Chin felt very accomplished. He touched her hair. Also let your hair grow longer. For me, okay? For some reason Huan, who had always been a simple person, couldn't help but nod and agree. Then as if she remembered something she added, help me wash it. His smile deepened but he didn't say anything. He just rubbed her hair again. After a long time he said in a hoarse voice, I'm leaving. He took a step back and looked at her again. Wait a minute. Huan stopped him. He was a little surprised but he didn't seem surprised at all. He looked at her with a smile. He had liked girls since he was a child. He and his brother Yi Muyun were both very affectionate. But they were different. His brother's little bun was soft and afraid of him since she was a child, while his Huan was a powerful girl who fell in love with someone else. Now from her eyes, Chinemo knew that he didn't need to be jealous anymore. His little girl liked him. Just as he was smiling, Huan went forward and hugged him. She put her arms around his waist and buried her little face in his chest. It was such a simple action, but he had longed for it for more than 10 years. Chinmo's eyes were a little hot. He reached out and touched her hair gently. His voice was hoarse. There are many people. They will laugh at us. I just want to hug you, she said angrily. At this time, Chinemo saw Rongyu coming out of the hotel elevator. His voice suddenly became hoarse. Rongyu is coming. Are you sure? The person in his arms stiffened and then hugged him even tighter. So Chinemo smiled and coaxed her. Okay, I'm going to be late for the meeting. You're the boss. If they're unhappy, fire them all, Huan said unreasonably. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When a woman was too cute and clingy, he couldn't stand it. However, he enjoyed it very much. At this moment, Rongyu seemed to have noticed them. His eyes narrowed, and he stared at them. Chinemo sighed and pulled the little fellow away from his arms. All right, the crew is here. Only then did Huan let go of him, dissatisfied. Chinemo touched her cheek. After this shoot, take a break for half a year. We'll have another child, he said. He was just saying it. He didn't think that she would want another one. But Huan agreed. He was stunned because she had changed too much. Yesterday, she still looked like she wanted to break up with him. But today, she wanted to have a monkey with him. Chinemo looked at her suspiciously. Huan's voice was a little low. You go back first. We'll talk about having children later. But we only want to have children in the next 2 years. It seems like we'll get older if we wait any longer. She added, Uncle Chin. Chinemo snorted. I'm only a few years older than you. However, he was 36 or 37. He was almost 40, which sounded a little old. If he wanted a child, it would be before he was 40. He said it casually. How could he really want a child to destroy his sexual happiness? I'll update tomorrow at noon. Chapter 4289. Huan smiled. I'm a few years younger than you. And men who are too calculative tend to age easily. He glared at her. However, Huan was still smiling. Oh yeah, President Chin. What we said yesterday morning still stands. You're still under probation. Don't think too much about having a child for the time being. You'll age easily. Chinemo was still glaring at her. No, he really wanted to bite her to death. Or at least kill her. At the very least, he wanted to shut her annoying little mouth. However, he didn't do anything. He just looked at her with a doting expression. After Huan finished speaking, she turned around and left. Chinemo couldn't help it. He caught her back and locked her in his arms. He lowered his head and rubbed her little face. His voice was even hoarser. You little naughty thing. Where did you learn to be so naughty? For some reason, Huan's face turned red. Her voice was also as low as his. I learned it from you. At this moment, Chinemo couldn't help but think of their entanglement last night. He felt indescribably moved. He looked at her and kissed her lightly for a while before letting go of her. His voice was hoarse. I got it. I'll be leaving first. I'll come over on the weekend. he added. I'll be coming over alone. Yihuan wanted to say something but gave up. She just smiled lightly. Chinemo still left. The private flight had been set. He had to leave. Yihuan continued filming. After that, it was as if they were in love. Everyone in the production crew could feel the change in Yihuan. She had become softer and gentler. And her filming style had also been affected. There was a hidden warmth in the originally melancholy plot, especially when the female lead was taught well by Yihuan. Even Kong Qiao was a little amazed. Although the female lead was not a newcomer, she had never been so stunning before. Actually, even in Yihuan's own works, there wasn't such warmth and tenderness. It wasn't sweetness, it was warmth. It was a kind of gentleness that flowed through time and women. Kong Qiao was stunned. Looking at the replay, she said to Yihuan in a low voice, "It seems like the relationship between you and your husband has been pretty good recently." Yihuan grunted. Kong Qiao smiled faintly and continued to watch. Yihuan's voice sounded beside him. "You're not bad, are you?" Then, Yihuan muttered to himself, "This piece of land will probably make many people famous." As she said that, she patted Kong Qiao. "Prepare to become famous." Concho's reaction was peculiar. The shooting went unexpectedly well. During the weekend, Chinemo also came over, and Yihuan could only accompany him at night. He gave her the cold shoulder. After suppressing himself for a week, he only asked for her twice passionately. After resting, it was already 8 o'clock. He kissed her. "Do you want to eat outside or order room service in the hotel?" Yihuan was still very tired. She held her waist and said, "Let's eat here. Wake me up. I want to take a bath." As she spoke, she sat up and exhaled. Then she looked at him and said, "You're too strong." Chinemo laughed and pinched her cheeks. Then he got up and fastened his belt. "Do you want me to carry you?" "No need." How could Yihuan let him carry her? She ran away. Chinemo went to order food. Then, while he smoked 2 cigarettes in the living room, the food arrived. He set up the dining room and went to the bathroom to find Yihuan. Yihuan had already put on a bathrobe and was applying skincare products in front of the mirror. He smiled and hugged her from behind. "I thought you didn't take care of yourself." Chapter 4290. Yihuan had already put on her bathrobe and was applying skincare products in front of the mirror. He smiled and hugged her from behind. "I thought you didn't take care of yourself." Yihuan struggled silently but failed. She patted her face and smiled. "Mr. Qin, a woman will grow old if she doesn't take care of herself." "I thought you wouldn't grow old." His face was in her neck and his voice was hoarse. "You've always been a young and beautiful girl." He wasn't praising or flattering her. In his heart, Yihuan was a young girl, still the little kid who followed him around when she was young. It really had nothing to do with Yihuan's achievements. No matter how many awards she won, she was still his girl, a girl who needed him to take care of her. Yihuan listened to his words and smiled. "When did you learn to say such nice words to a few women?" Chinemo chuckled. "Am I such a casual man?" He took a few bites and said, "I'll take you out after dinner." "I don't want to go out." Yihuan looked at him in the mirror. "I'm very tired." He chuckled. "Why don't we stay in the hotel and do it, huh?" Yihuan was a little speechless. "Chinemo, can you have some integrity?" Chinemo didn't say anything at first. He just held her hand and went to the dining room. He prepared the dishes for her and a bowl of soup for her. Then he said elegantly, "I've been holding back for a long time." Yihuan almost spat out the soup in her mouth. She glared at him. Chinemo was still smiling. "For an adult man, we've had sex for less than a year. Don't you think you've treated me badly?" He had married her when he was 30, and they had separated in less than half a year. Later, they had been apart more than ever. They had only had a normal weekend couple in the past month. How could he be satisfied with a few times? He was just considerate of her. Otherwise, he would have kept her in the hotel room day and night. Yihuan was still drinking the soup, but she just stared at him. After a long time, she said softly, "You can find someone else if you're not satisfied." I didn't stop him. He didn't get angry. He poured himself a glass of aperitif, took a sip and smiled faintly. "You clearly know." Yihuan didn't say anything else. She lowered her eyes and quietly ate her dinner. Actually, it was already close to the time for supper. She was really hungry, so she ate quickly and a lot. It was just that she was too busy, so she was still very thin. Chinemo had used up a lot of energy, but he was still eating slowly. Perhaps it was because he didn't like it or something. He didn't eat much. Huan looked at him, then silently cut a piece of roasted lamb chops and pushed the plate back to him. She didn't say anything, but Chinemo just stared into her eyes silently. She looked down, unwilling to let him see through her heart. He said, Huan. She snorted softly. He asked her softly, in your heart, who is more important, me or Rongyu? Childish. This was Miss He's answer. Chinmo's mouth was more gentle. He leaned over and kissed her. Later, he didn't say anything else. He just ate the lamb chops that she cut for him. Later, she was reading the script on the bed, and he was quietly working on his work with his notebook. Chapter 4291. For Chinemo, this was indeed a great temptation. He glanced at her, and Huan was lying beside him. Her short hair was a little messy, and she looked like a cute little puppy. A little puppy that was fatally attractive to him. He looked at her quietly for 2 seconds, and then threw the notebook aside, lying flat on the bed and closing his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he reached out and pulled her hair. Let's go out for supper first. We'll talk when we come back. Huan rolled her eyes at him. You're so greedy. Men are all greedy, Miss He. He lowered his head and kissed her little mouth. Please be considerate of a man who hasn't been in a relationship with you officially. Love can be done anytime, but love can't be done at any time. You can't miss the opportunity. As he spoke, he patted her butt. Go change your clothes. Hurry up. He pulled Huan up and pushed her into the changing room. He picked a white t-shirt and jeans for her, and then grabbed a coat. He could go out at any time. Downstairs, in the parking lot, they sat in a very cool sports car. Huan mumbled while fastening the seat belt. I didn't know you were so pure. Chinemo was in a very good mood. Before starting the car, he looked at her and smiled meaningfully. There are many things you don't know. For example, I'm not attracted to seductive women. Instead, I like some. As he spoke, his eyes swept over her body and stopped somewhere. In fact, they had been husband and wife for several years. Although they didn't spend much time together, they were very familiar with each other's bodies. But now the feeling was completely different. Huan felt that she was being teased. She glared at him. Who knows how many indecent things you have behind your back? All my indecent things are with you. Chinemo had already started the car. Don't you know? She turned her head and ignored him. Chinemo drove the car to the busiest place in the center of City C. He found a barbecue restaurant that looked good. Huan looked through the car window and unfastened the seat belt. You've been here before? Chinemo smiled. If you're in a relationship, the necessary strategies are indispensable. Huan glanced at him. In fact, this supper was to accompany him. Huan had eaten with him a few times and found that he did not have a good appetite. However, when he went crazy at that time, he did not care at all. Huan ordered top-quality Wagyu beef and some vegetables, which he had roasted himself. Chinmo's cooking skills were pretty good. He saw that Huan didn't eat much and piled all the food on his side. He laughed. You look like... Madam is worried that her husband's body can't take it, so she's trying to make up for it. Nothing good comes out of a dog's mouth. She glared at him and snatched the food from him. Chinemo shared some with her. Actually, he wasn't too picky about food as long as he could fill his stomach. The thing he was most stubborn about in his life was Huan, but she might not have realized it yet. However, she wanted him to eat more, so he ate more. It could be said that he was trying to make her happy. Later, Huan roasted it herself because she found it fun. The more she roasted, the more Chinmo's stomach felt bad. However, as a man in love, it was necessary to make his girlfriend happy. In the end, his stomach felt a little uncomfortable, but he endured it. He did not want to spoil her mood. City C was an ancient city. Huan wanted to go for a walk, and he wanted to accompany her. As for whether they loved each other, and when they would do it, they actually had a lifetime. So what did it matter? Chapter 4292. Other than the faint pain in his stomach, Chin Mo felt that the night was wonderful. He had fulfilled his dream from more than 10 years ago. More than 10 years later, Huan was still a little girl just like before. At midnight, the ancient city not far away let off fireworks to celebrate. He held her in his arms on the edge of the city wall and lowered his head to kiss her. Huan didn't refuse. At this moment, he thought that she liked him and even fell in love with him. Because the body couldn't lie, they could both feel each other's body temperature. On such a cold night, no one was willing to break the silence. This moment was simply too wonderful. He felt like he was dreaming. Even in his dreams, he would dream that Huan would suddenly fall in love with him one day. And that dream was a nightmare to him for the first year of their marriage. After kissing for a long time, when they returned to the car, Chin Mo asked Huan to drive. She also thought that he was too tired, so she drove and let him sit in the back seat. When they arrived at the hotel, she stopped the car and looked sideways. Chin Mo was lying on his side in the back seat, seemingly asleep. Huan whispered to him, "Chin Mo, we're at the hotel." He didn't respond. She smiled, opened the car door, and then opened the back door. Just as she was about to speak to him, she found that his face was abnormally pale, and his forehead was covered with fine sweat. When she touched it, she felt cold. "Chin Mo." Huan called his name loudly and patted his face. But he still didn't respond. Huan was a little anxious. She immediately took out her phone and called Chin. As soon as Chin picked up, she said anxiously, "Chin." Chin Mo suddenly felt cold all over. His face was pale and he was sweating. "We were fine outside, but he fell asleep in the car and became like this." Chin had just fallen asleep, and now he was completely awake. He sat up and asked, "What else did you do outside?" "We ate barbecued meat," Huan said quickly. Chin's voice softened. "Take him to the hospital immediately. Call me if anything happens. I'll come over directly if necessary." Huan agreed. She got back in the car and navigated to the nearest hospital. Half an hour later, in the examination room of a certain hospital in Sea City, the doctor on duty looked at the scan and said somewhat speechlessly, "The patient's stomach is not good to begin with. This time, it's probably because he ate too much, so it's an acute stomachache. It should be very painful, but he actually endured it for so long." Huan remembered that they had kissed for at least an hour at the city wall, and her face was a little hot. She even cursed Chin Mo in her heart. What the fuck? Why was he trying to act cool when his stomach was hurting? However, she also felt a little guilty. He didn't eat much at first, and she thought he was in a bad mood. She didn't know that his stomach had always been bad, and she still forced him to eat so much barbecued meat. She licked her lips and asked softly, "Can his stomach recover?" "Well, try not to order stimulating food. Nourishing the stomach won't be a big problem," the doctor said. Huan breathed a sigh of relief. The doctor coughed lightly. "The patient may have diarrhea. After all, his stomach can't absorb the food." "Huan." She first called Chin and told her not to come over. It wasn't a big problem. She also asked about Chin Mo's physical condition. Chin wanted to say something, but stopped. After a while she said, "He hasn't been very happy these years. Especially after you go to America." Huan was stunned. After a long time, Chin said again, "Prepare something good for his stomach, preferably Chinese food. Let him rest in Sea City for the next few days." "Huan, I'll leave Chin Mo to you. Don't worry about Huan, we'll take good care of her." Chapter 4293. Chin Mo was sent to the VIP ward. Fortunately, it was just acute gastritis, and he didn't need surgery. He only needed to stay in the hospital for 3 days and rest for a week. Huan sat beside him and reached out to touch his face. "Do you feel anything now?" Chin Mo had already woken up. He opened his eyes and looked at Huan. "What?" Huan pursed her lips and was too embarrassed to say it. She just glared at him. "You're so stupid. If you can't eat, then don't eat. Now you're lying in the hospital." Chin Mo was used to being domineering. Now that he was lying in the ward and wearing the blue and white striped hospital gown, he actually looked weak. He still lay there and looked at her quietly. There was a hint of weakness in his black eyes. Are you angry? Yi-Hwan snorted. Why would I be angry? I'm not the one suffering here. Then you feel sorry for her? He immediately asked. Yi-Hwan looked as if her tail had been stepped on. That's even more so. Chin-Emo stared at her. After a while, he reached out to touch her face. He couldn't reach it, and wanted to move away. At first, Yi-Hwan didn't want to talk to him. But when she saw him enduring the pain, her heart softened. However, her face was still stinky. It seemed like she was unwilling to move her face closer. Chin-Emo gently touched her face and chuckled. You're still denying it? Your eyes are red. You must have cried. Who cried? I didn't. She refused to admit it. Chin-Emo didn't say anything else. He just reached out and gently touched her eyelids. His voice was hoarse. Then what's wrong with your eyes? Is there sand in them? Yes, there's sand in them. Yi-Hwan stared at him stubbornly. Chin-Emo just smiled gently. Yi-Hwan's face was very hot. Just when she was about to say something to refute him, the nurse beside her couldn't help but laugh. Mr. Chin, when you were sent here for the examination, Mrs. Chin kept crying outside. Your wife loves you very much. Yi-Hwan, damn it, I don't care about my face. But she couldn't say anything to the nurse. She could only look at the sky in silence. Although Chin-Emo was weak, his gaze was clear and gentle at this moment. Moreover, he realized that there were a lot of people around, so he didn't say anything. He just held Yi-Hwan's finger silently, just like a young man, a little childish but absolutely sincere. Yi-Hwan's little finger twitched, but she gave up on retracting it. He held it, and sometimes he would secretly tickle her. It was very childish. She was a little tired from sitting like that, so she leaned against the headboard. She was actually scared out of her wits, but she didn't tell him. Her eyes were still red. The nurse finished her work and left. Finally, it was quiet. Chin-Emo was resting with his eyes closed. He suddenly asked, Why do they call you Mrs. Chin? Is it very important? Yi-Hwan obviously didn't want to answer his question. Chin-Emo closed his eyes and chuckled. It's very important to me. Did you fill in your medical card as husband and wife? Yi-Hwan nodded. Still unsatisfied, he asked again. Why do you have to do that? Yi-Hwan finally couldn't take it anymore. Chin-Emo, you're old. We came here together. If I don't fill in your medical card as husband and wife, am I supposed to fill in our medical card as husband and wife? Chin-Emo opened his eyes and looked at her. He was a little surprised and hurt. I'm not old. Do I look that wretched? Chapter 4294. Chin-Emo was so angry that he turned around and ignored her. The good atmosphere was completely ruined by Yi-Hwan. His heart was softened and touched. It was all given to a little naughty thing. No, it was fed to a puppy. Chin-Emo was furious. He was sick, so he shouldn't act like a proud little princess who needed to be coaxed. Yi-Hwan patted his back. Are you angry? He ignored her and pretended to sleep. Yi-Hwan wasn't good at coaxing people. At first she felt very guilty and worried, but now that he was fine and still had the strength to throw a tantrum, her worry and guilt were temporarily put aside. She wanted to catch up on her sleep. Although it was already 2 in the morning, she still had to sleep. Yi-Hwan really felt that everyone should rest. In this aspect, she was a little straightforward. After all, she was a little girl and didn't know how to coax people. So, she really fell asleep and slept lightly on Chin-Mo's back. Chin-Emo waited for a long time, but didn't get an apology. He turned around and saw that Yi-Hwan had actually fallen asleep. What should he do? He opened his eyes and gritted his teeth in anger. So he decided to give her a cold war. However, for a patient with gastrointestinal problems, it was very troublesome to have no one to take care of him. Especially after only half an hour, his abdomen started to hurt abnormally again. Chin-Emo quietly endured it for a while. Finally, he couldn't help but push Yi-Hwan. Yi-Hwan woke up immediately. What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Chin-Emo was still angry. He gritted his teeth and said word by word. I want to go to the toilet. Yi-Hwan was stunned for a moment. Then she understood everything. She held the 4 bottle in one hand and supported him with the other. Cold sweat broke out on Chin-Mo's forehead again. She felt a little sorry for him when she saw that. She whispered, You've been holding it in for a while, haven't you? He didn't say anything, and quickened his steps to the toilet. Yi-hwan helped him hang up the 4 bottle and left, leaving Chin-emo with dignity. She guessed that if she didn't leave, he would still hold it in. She leaned against the door, and suddenly felt a kind of heartache. In fact, Chin-emo had never been a person who did stupid things. On the contrary, he was very decisive and ruthless. It was rare for him to do something like this. She lowered her eyes. She knew very well that he was just trying to make her happy. Yi-hwan was a little irritated, and wanted to smoke for some reason. He wanted to find something to relieve his boredom. Perhaps it was the intense emotions that made her a little overwhelmed. She thought that it was her and Chin-mo's first time, so they were a little awkward. Yi-hwan leaned against the door and let out a long sigh. At that moment, she heard Chin-mo's voice. I'm done. Yi-hwan was stunned for a moment before he pushed the door open and entered. Chin-emo had already stood up. He had pulled up his shirt, but one of his hands was not very smooth. Yi-hwan quietly helped him tidy up and looked at him. Are you done? A pained expression suddenly appeared on Chin-mo's face as he frowned slightly. Maybe it's not healed yet. Yi-hwan. That night, no one slept well. Chin-emo was so tired that he almost collapsed. When the sun rose, he was done tossing and turning. Yi-hwan was also very tired. Looking at his sleeping face, she could clearly feel that he had lost a lot of weight overnight. He wasn't very muscular to begin with, and now he looked even thinner. She stretched out her fingers and gently stroked his face. You can't sleep? He suddenly opened his eyes and pulled her into his arms. Let's sleep. Yi-hwan buried her face in his neck. After a while she whispered his name. Chin-emo. He nodded and reached out to stroke her little head. What's wrong? Yi-hwan wrinkled her nose. I keep feeling that you have a weird smell on you. Chapter 4295. Chin-emo glared at her. Yi-hwan nestled in his arms. It's just a smell. Do you want to take a shower? Her man gritted his teeth. Yi-hwan, you're letting a gastritis patient take a shower now. She was still stubborn. But it stinks. You can refine your words. He harumphed coldly before letting go of her. He did not want to talk to her anymore. She would despise him anyway. President Chin was also at Sundara. He was clearly sick because of her, yet she was despising him now. Hence, no matter how weak he was still angry. Moreover, his body was not feeling well. He tossed and turned, unable to sleep. His stomach was even more uncomfortable. Yi-hwan laid beside him. Probably sensing his discomfort, she asked softly, Should I call the doctor over? No need. The doctor can't make my body smell good either, he said childishly. Then, Yi-hwan did not say anything more. President Chin was furious. This heartless little bastard. He closed his eyes and did not speak again. After a long time, he felt a small thing burrowing into his embrace. 2 slender arms were still wrapped around his waist. She was like a fire doll since she was young, very hot. At this moment, her palm was placed on his stomach, and gently rubbed it for him. Chin-emo did not know why, but his heart suddenly softened. He should not have forgiven this hateful little thing so easily. However, he still could not resist her. He had liked her for so long. Even if she took a small step, he was willing to take the remaining dozens or hundreds of steps. This time was no exception. Chin-emo reached out and grabbed her hand. He sighed softly. Yi-hwan, I really don't know what to do with you. Yi-hwan did not say anything. She just rested her head on his shoulder. Just as Chin-emo was about to fall asleep, she said softly, I'll treat you better in the future. He seemed to wake up all of a sudden and smiled faintly. By the time Chin-emo woke up, it was already noon. When he opened his eyes, he was surrounded by white. The pillow was empty. He let out a long breath and asked the nurse beside him, Where's my wife? The nurse was changing the drip. She smiled and said, Director, he went to work. She told you to eat something. Oh, she also ordered lunch for you. Chin-mo thought to himself, without a companion, he went to work and gave her a bad review. However, he also knew that she couldn't let go of her work. It was Yi-hwan's limit to do this. Besides, she didn't sleep much last night, and had to work during the day. Thus, he sat up and dialed Yi-hwan's number. The other side quickly picked up. You're awake? Chin-emo nodded and asked her, Have you had breakfast and lunch? Yi-Hwan answered honestly. I had lunch. He was furious. Don't you need to eat breakfast? What if your stomach is hungry? Yi-Hwan blurted out. I don't think you have the right to say that about me. You're lying in the hospital yourself. He ground his teeth angrily again. Yi-Hwan knew that he was angry, so she coaxed him. Don't be angry. I'll come to accompany you after work. Chinemo felt a little warm in his heart. At the same time, he felt sorry for her. He said subconsciously, why don't you stay in the hotel? It's not a serious illness. Really? Then I really won't come? Yi-Hwan smiled. Chapter 4296. Chinemo froze for a moment. She sighed faintly. Look at you. You're still the CEO. You always say one thing but mean another. Chinemo was usually a very carefree person, but in front of Yi-Hwan, it was useless no matter how carefree he was. He was silent for a while before he said in a low voice, Come over. Yi-Hwan laughed. Take care of yourself. I'll cook for you tonight. Was it okay for her to cook? Chinemo smiled and hung up. The nurse brought Yi-Hwan's lunch over. It was a nourishing porridge made by the best shop in Sea City. The porridge smelled delicious as soon as the box was opened. Chinemo ate most of the porridge with one hand and asked the nurse to clean it up. He was a little bored, so he contacted his secretary, He, about some work-related matters and slept in the afternoon. When he woke up, Yi-Hwan was already there, with a bag of fresh vegetables in her hand. Chinemo looked at her and sat up. Do you really know how to cook? A little. Yi-Hwan put the vegetables away, washed her face, and looked for information on her phone. With one look, Chinemo could tell that she had probably never done it before. His heart turned cold. Then he got off the bed, hugged her waist from behind, and bit the back of her neck. I'm still sick. If you make me a dark cuisine, I'll get even sicker. I might even have to stay here for a month. By then, I'll be done with you. Yi-Hwan tilted her head and looked at him. Then she smiled. Yes, it's very possible. Chinemo sighed. Let me do it. Hinan's body stiffened. Then, she said gloomily as she swiped on her phone. Chinemo, do you think I can't be a good wife? Chinemo stood behind her and did not speak for a long time. At first, Yi-Hwan did not react. Then, she came back to her senses. Her face was a little hot. She said in a low voice, I'll go cook. He pulled her back into his arms and hugged her tightly. Yi-Hwan whispered, Let go of me. A nurse will come in at any time. Aren't we married? Chinemo was a little absent-minded. Then he moved on to another topic. I'll feel sorry for you if you've been busy all day, Yi-Hwan let him hug her and asked in a low voice. So you're going to cook? In your dreams? To her surprise, he bit her on the back of her ear. Then, he picked up his phone and dialed a number. He booked a 5-star chef to come over and cook 3 dishes, and a soup for them. Yi-Hwan shook his head, but didn't refute. Later, when he was dealing with work on his bed, Yi-Hwan went to take a shower, and came back to serve his master. The 5-star chef came to make dinner, and then left. Yi-Hwan was a little speechless as she prepared dinner. While preparing the food, she emphasized, It's not that I can't cook. Chinemo dropped the notebook in his hand. But I don't want you to be an old woman. As he spoke, he took her hand and kissed it. Yi-Hwan was speechless. She looked at the notebook on the bed and suddenly asked him, Why do you have a notebook here? Chinemo shrugged and said nonchalantly, The manager of the branch gave it to me. Yi-Hwan also sat down. Then she said thoughtfully, Actually, in this case, you can ask someone to take care of you. Chinemo stared at her for a few seconds. His gaze made Yi-Hwan want to look away. After a while, she wanted to say something, but Chinemo interrupted her. I'll be discharged tomorrow afternoon. I won't disturb you for too long. Chapter 4297. Yi-Hwan bit her lip. You know that's not what I meant. As she said that, she mashed the food on her plate and said softly, Do you have to pretend to be a victim to make me feel guilty? Chinemo smiled and didn't say anything else. Yi-Hwan pursed her lips. She knew that this was his usual trick, so she didn't say anything else, and just ate quietly. The food made by a 5-star chef was indeed different. Even if it was a home-cooked meal, It could be made into a masterpiece. However, both of them were a little upset. In fact, this was normal. Young couples in love were often like this. Although they had long passed the stage of being young, it was the first time for everyone to fall in love. After dinner, Juan was the one who cleaned up the dishes. After that, he still worked, and so did she. One sat on the bed, and the other sat on the small sofa. It was like a boundary. At 10 o'clock at night, Juan threw the script down and exhaled. Okay, time to sleep. Chinemo immediately put away his notebook and lay straight. Juan looked at him, and found it funny. Aren't you going to the bathroom? Chinemo opened his eyes and said coldly, I'm not a child. He then closed his eyes again. Juan was a little speechless. She didn't force him, and climbed into bed. She was really a little tired and sleepy. She fell asleep very quickly and carefully next to him. Chinemo was a little angry at first, but when he saw that she still had a faint trace of exhaustion on her face, the anger in his heart suddenly disappeared. What was left was a little self-blame. He said that he would take care of her, but now he was letting her take care of him. Juan was actually just a little girl. She had been pampered since she was young. It was really not easy for her to be willing to cook for him while working. He really shouldn't do this to her. Chinemo felt a little guilty. He reached out and touched her little face gently. He said with a little grievance, I took a shower today, but you didn't smell it. Later, he trapped her small body in his arms and gently hugged her. He always felt that it was not enough. Juan didn't wake up the whole night, and Chinemo felt guilty and wrong the whole night. He didn't fall asleep until 4 o'clock in the morning. When she woke up, Juan was no longer there. But she left him a note, saying that she had eaten breakfast and bought it for him. When he woke up, she asked the nurse to heat it up for him. He smiled. He had already recovered a long time ago. There was no need for a nurse. Chinemo raised his hand and looked at his watch. It was already 10 o'clock. No wonder he looked so refreshed. In fact, this was really nothing to him. In the past, when the company was busy, he still had to get up and go to work when his fever reached 40 degrees Celsius. It was just that Juan wasn't by his side at that time. Now lying down, he felt a little happy. The corners of Chinmo's mouth curled up slightly. He laughed at himself for being silly, and then felt that Juan was silly. He ate breakfast and took him 4 drip for the whole day. In the afternoon, he was completely fine and strongly requested to be discharged. He didn't tell Juan when he left the hospital, and went straight to her hotel room. At 6 o'clock in the afternoon, Juan came to the hospital. The ward was empty. She was stunned and asked the nurse beside her, Where's Mr. Chin? The nurse looked at her strangely. Mr. Chin was discharged. Mrs. Chin, don't you know? Juan forced a smile. He probably wanted to give me a surprise. Chapter 4298. When Juan walked out, she looked at the flowers in her hand. It was a bouquet of white roses. She also bought a crystal vase because Chinemo liked it. She thought that putting it at the patient's bedside would make him feel better. But he was gone now, and she didn't even know where he went. Juan stood at the door for a while, then walked slowly and threw the roses in her hand into the trash can. She looked at it quietly for a while, feeling a little disappointed. How should she put it? She felt like a failure. She was an actress, a famous director, famous both in the mainland and abroad. But she wasn't a good wife or a good mother to Chinemo. He didn't think that she could cook, so he would rather find a 5-star chef to make 3 simple dishes and 1 soup. She just didn't approve of his thoughtfulness at that moment. She was a little tired, but when she got into the car, Juan still called Chinemo, asking him where he was and if he had returned to B City. Chinemo didn't answer her directly. He just told her that he was discharged from the hospital, and then asked where she was. Juan looked at the long hospital corridor and said in a low voice, I'm in the hospital. I'm going back to the hotel in a while. Then she added, Take good care of yourself. She hung up. She didn't know why she was depressed, but she just felt a little uncomfortable. If liking someone was so uncomfortable, she wouldn't have liked him if she had known. She didn't go back to the hotel immediately, but drove around C-City. It was almost 9 o'clock when she got back. When Juan got out of the car, she was a little tired. She and Chinemo were actually the same kind of people. They were born with superiority and didn't need to worry about the future. They only needed to work hard and move forward. They could fail because they were destined to succeed because they were born. They were much luckier than most people. But feelings were different. Feelings didn't matter where they were born. They would have to suffer a lot. But this kind of birth would have a lot more troubles. It was better to be ordinary. Yihuan admitted that she was a coward. She didn't want to spend much effort on feelings. She was born a little lazy. So once Chinemo left, she was a little confused and self-denying. Perhaps they hadn't learned how to love others. Yihuan swiped the card to open the door of the suite, and was surprised to find that the lights were on. The man she thought was in B City was sitting on the sofa with a laptop by his side. He was wearing a bathrobe and was reading documents. Yihuan felt as though something was stuck in his throat. After a while, he found his voice and said in a hoarse voice, "Chinemo." He looked up. "You're back." Yihuan nodded and stood at the door. "Why didn't you return to B City?" Chinemo closed the notebook. "You don't want me to come back?" "No." Yihuan looked down. "Aren't you going to be discharged tomorrow?" "I don't want you to rush back and forth. My heart will ache." He still looked at her calmly, as if he was saying something very normal. Yihuan stared at him for a long time before she said bitterly, "You could have told me. I went to the hospital one more time today." This time, he got up and walked straight toward her. He stretched out a finger and gently stroked her face. His voice was extremely hoarse. "Are you especially disappointed that I didn't report to you?" Chapter 4299. His voice was very hoarse. "Are you very disappointed that I didn't tell you?" Yihuan slapped his hand away and turned her head to the side. "Don't touch me." But her eyes were still secretly red. She didn't like herself like this. She was too fragile and easily controlled by Chinemo. He could make her happy, angry, and satisfied as he wanted. She didn't like him like this either. He was scheming against her. Chinemo stared at her red eyes and reached out to touch them carefully. His voice was unbelievably gentle. "Yihuan, tell me where you have been for the past few hours." She didn't want him to touch her and wanted to step back, but he quickly held her waist. Yihuan bit her lips and looked down with a tinge of unwillingness. "I went to the hospital." I know. I also bought flowers." This time he didn't answer. Instead, he looked at her deeply, and his expression was a little moved. He knew Yihuan. She was a very passive person in love, and wouldn't easily express herself. Buying flowers was something that men should do, but she actually did it. He touched her eyelids again, and his voice was hoarse with a touch of a doting smile. "Is it because you want to please me and make me happy?" Yihuan snorted. "I threw it away. I threw it into the trash can. That's not the point. The point is that you bought it." He smiled slightly and seemed to be coaxing her. His voice was particularly hoarse. "What did you buy?" "White roses," she said angrily. Chinemo pinched her face. "You know me very well. I really like white roses." At this moment, Chinemo turned into the little princess of Momo. Yihuan was speechless. She glared at him. "Don't think that I will forgive you just like this." Then she got rid of him, and instinctively went to the dining room to find something to eat. Then she saw 3 dishes and a soup. It didn't look like it was made by a 5-star chef, nor did it look like takeout. It was refreshing and very homely. "Doesn't it look good?" "I made it." He smiled. Yihuan knew that he could cook, but she didn't expect that he would do it himself here. She sat down quietly and looked at him before eating. "I still don't forgive you." Chinemo followed her and gently pressed his hand on the back of the chair behind her. He leaned close to her and said with a smile, "Then tell me, what did I do to make you particularly unhappy?" His words sounded like a trap. Yihuan didn't fall for it. She ate quietly. However, Chinemo would not let her go. He chuckled and said, "Leaving without saying goodbye? Won't you have a chance to perform?" He paused for a moment, then continued in a deep voice, "You feel defeated, don't you?" "Chinemo." Yihuan finally couldn't take it anymore. She stared at him. "Aren't you hungry? You might not have fully recovered from your stomach trouble." He smiled faintly. "All right, we'll discuss this later." Yihuan didn't want to talk about it. After dinner, she took a shower and lay in bed, scrolling through Weibo. Who was Chin Mo? How could he allow her to do this? He stood at the end of the bed and smiled calmly. Mrs. Chin, are you hinting at me? Don't call me that. Call me He Huan or Miss He, or even Director He. He Huan didn't even look up. She was really angry with him. Chapter 4300. He Huan ignored him and continued to browse through the trending topic. Chin Mo leaned over shamelessly. Director He, don't you need anything? He Huan's face froze. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. She slowly moved her eyes away from the phone screen and looked at Chin Mo's handsome face. His face was indeed very good-looking, even better than the trending topic. However, she just wasn't interested in him tonight. She just gave him the cold shoulder, even if he was sick and had to cook for her. He was just like that. He didn't care about her feelings at all. She was very tired from work, and her mood was up and down because of him. It was normal for her to give him a cold shoulder. Just the thought of the flowers in the trash was enough to make her unhappy. He Huan gritted her teeth and said, "No need." "But I need it," he said even more shamelessly. "Let's cooperate just like before." This time, He Huan put down the phone completely and stared at his face. "Chin Mo, the vase I bought today was very expensive. It's more than 10,000 yuan. You threw it away." He crawled over to her and leaned against the headboard. He didn't hug her, but only gently pinched her face. What a wastrel! He Huan felt that she was about to be defeated by him. She emphasized, "That's not the point." She wanted to say that it was her kind intention, but he left without saying goodbye. Although he was in the hotel, he didn't tell her that he was sick. Not to mention that he was not surprised. There was no joy. However, she didn't want to tell Chin Mo about her feelings, so she just turned her head away and didn't want to talk to him. Chin Mo stared at her. He wasn't such a dull man. He knew how she was feeling. Perhaps he was deliberately trying to make her anxious and anxious. He had always been the one who took the initiative in their relationship, and He Huan rarely tasted the feeling of being ignored. Now she was obviously unhappy and angry. His voice was particularly hoarse. "Seeing you sad, I should feel sad and heartache, but I'm very happy, He Huan." He Huan didn't want to look at him, but now she couldn't help but raise her head. She wanted to say to his mother. She glared at him, and a thin layer of mist appeared in her eyes. She had never been a pretentious woman, but now she was very uncomfortable. She couldn't describe it, but she didn't know what it was exactly. He Huan's eyes were sore after staring for a while, but Chin Mo was still smiling faintly. She was furious. Damn it! She turned her back and completely ignored him. She even gave him a kick in retaliation. "Go away." Chin Mo lowered his head and gazed at her. With a slight turn of his body, he pulled her into his arms. He put his thin lips on her ear. "Are you really angry? Go away," He Huan said angrily. Chin Mo laughed. "You really want me to leave? If they were really willing, then who would stay outside and never come back? If they were really willing, then they wouldn't cry, right?" He Huan said stubbornly. "Who cried? I didn't." Chin Mo let out a long "oh" and deliberately said, "That's a puppy crying." He Huan couldn't bear it anymore. She turned around and bit him, wanting to bite him to death. She buried her face in his neck and bit his Adam's apple. She couldn't use her strength, and the bite became a little warm. Chin Mo's voice became especially hoarse and sexy. "You said you're not a puppy. Who's the one biting me now?" Chapter 4301. He Huan's teeth were already sore from clenching them so hard that his flesh hardened. But now that he called her a puppy, she wouldn't relent and wouldn't let go. Seeing her like this, Chin Mo found it both funny and adorable. He reached out and gently stroked her hair. His voice was especially hoarse as he said, "You really think you're a puppy, huh? I can't bear to." Then he added, "It really looks like a short-haired dog." He Huan was speechless. She wasn't his match in terms of eloquence, and she was even angrier now. She didn't have the ability to fight to a draw with him. Besides, she was also afraid that he would do something reckless. She could already feel something stirring in his arms. How stupid would she be to provoke him again? So after she moved her face away, It landed on his shoulder. He was wearing a nice shirt, and it was very comfortable to rub against her face. Yeah, it made her feel sleepy. Yihuan really closed her eyes. One of her hands was around his neck, and the other was around his waist. Chinemo lowered his head and said a few words to her. She didn't respond until Chinemo said softly, "Grow your hair long." No. She rejected him mercilessly. "I'll help you wash and blow dry it," he coaxed her again. Yihuan raised her head in his arms. Her black eyes opened into a cute slit. "I'm still angry at you. You won't be angry when your hair is long." Chinemo chuckled. Yihuan still said no, and she fell asleep again. Later, Chinemo reached out and patted her shoulder gently. He didn't disturb her anymore, and just pulled the blanket over her. She must be tired. After a busy day, she realized that he was gone. Her heart was tired too. She gently moved her face closer and whispered, "I lied. Actually, my heart aches." Yihuan was in a deep sleep. When she woke up, she realized that there was a different fresh fragrance in the air. She sat up immediately and realized that the bed was covered with white roses. The thorns on the long stems had been carefully removed. The roses on the bed were luxurious. He blinked and grabbed his watch. It was already 10 o'clock. After the shock, she remembered that she had a day of rest today, so she scratched her short hair and lay down again. After lying down, he called out softly. Chinemo, she knew that he must still be there. After all, CEO Chin had done such a romantic act. He would definitely collect some commission. Sure enough, he answered after she called him. After a while, Chinemo came out of the washroom, feeling refreshed. He leaned against the door of the washroom. His lazy posture was very attractive. Yihuan glanced at him, and then closed her eyes again. "What do you mean by doing this so early in the morning? How much longer until you finish filming?" Chinemo asked her. Yihuan picked up a rose and sniffed it. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, I forgot to tell you that I may work in Sea City. Yes, in this suite. If you don't think it's convenient, we can find another place to live. After all, the higher-ups in B City will appear in our room from time to time for meetings." "Yihuan, you don't have a good habit of throwing your clothes everywhere. I think it's inconvenient, right?" Yihuan sensed a conspiracy and frowned. It seems that President Chin has already found a place to live. Chinemo was silent for a while. "Director He, your words are so refreshing." Chapter 4302. Yihuan sat up on the bed, tilting her head and looking at him. "Screenwriter Rong has been with the crew recently, so I'm influenced by what I see and hear." Chinmo's posture was still very lazy, but the expression on his face didn't show it. He gritted his teeth, walking towards Yihuan step by step. He leaned in close to her and said in a low and deep voice, "Yihuan, you really know how to piss me off." Then he lowered his head and kissed her. It seemed like he was letting himself go, but it also seemed like he was coaxing her. Anyway, this kiss caused a lot of anger, but he controlled it. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Get up, go wash your face and brush your teeth. I'll take you to our room later." Yihuan's lips were a little swollen from the kiss, and her eyes were a little dazed. When she came back to her senses, she looked up at him. "President Chin, is this also considered being influenced by what you see and hear?" He muttered angrily, "Probably." Then he said indignantly, "You know what I care about the most, but you have to piss me off." He straightened his body, but Yihuan hugged him. Hugging him, Yihuan paused for a moment before asking in his ear, "Isn't the person you care about the most? When did it become Rongyu? Do you like him?" Chinemo lowered his eyes and looked at the little girl in his arms. Her gaze was a little mischievous and bold, looking at him fearlessly. Chinemo chuckled and reached out to pinch her cheek. "If I really like him, what will you do?" With that said, he slapped her but hard. "Director He, where did you get influenced by what you see and hear?" "One gets influenced by one's company," Yihuan spat out. Chinmo's gaze suddenly turned dangerous. He stared at her for a while before smiling. "I really want to see if your little heart has turned black." Yihuan ignored his crazy words and jumped off the bed to go to the bathroom. Then she turned back. "What about Yihuan? Is she coming over?" Chinmo's answer was, "She has to go to school and study hard. The future of the Chin family depends on her." Huan frowned and said while squeezing the toothpaste, I don't want her to take over King Entertainment. It was too hard for a girl. Moreover, Huan looked like the same type as Tang Cher. She didn't want to go to an elite education at a young age. In fact, she still didn't understand Qin Mo. If she knew, she wouldn't be so worried. Qin Mo and Yi Muyan had been educated since a long time ago. Huan had grown up, but she only knew how to act cute every day. It was obvious that she was raised from a rich family. Perhaps he saw Huan's shadow in Huan. How could Qin Mo bear to let her suffer? After Huan said that, Qin Mo followed her into the bathroom. He hugged her waist from behind and said hoarsely, So while I can still move, let's have a son. She slapped his unruly hand away. Futile thinking. Qin Mo wasn't angry. He clung on to her again. You can't bear to have a daughter, and you say I'm futile when we have a son. Then what should we have? Doesn't Qin have a son? Huan was also very sarcastic. She brushed her teeth and said that. Qin Mo smiled faintly. He had always known that Huan didn't have much ambition for money. She only liked to do what she liked. So she didn't think that King Entertainment's 200 billion market value was a big deal. It wasn't that he couldn't bear to, but Qinshin's son's surname was Lan. The Lan family's Grand Hyatt Hotel wasn't small either. Inheriting it would be tiring enough. With King Entertainment, Lan Yu's child might not even have time for sex after he grew up and got married. Chapter 4303. Qin Mo thought for a moment, then leaned over and bit the back of her soft neck. You're so cruel. Lan Yu, that child, has a heavy burden on his own. Huan endured him as she brushed her teeth. She couldn't help but move, wanting to push him away. However, he was too shameless. He still held her, looking intoxicated. Qin Mo, didn't you say that dogs are the ones that bite people? Huan endured and said. Qin Mo chuckled. Then I'm a big wolf dog. I only bite you. As he spoke, he exhaled solemnly, and then bit Huan's neck forcefully. Huan couldn't stand him anymore. Qin Mo, you're so shameless. Qin Mo laughed. He laughed very happily. Shameless? Didn't you cry from worry? Huan fell silent, and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she brushed her teeth fiercely. Qin Mo chuckled. He knew that there were some things Huan didn't want to admit. He waited for Huan to finish brushing her teeth. He didn't eat breakfast, and took her to the car downstairs. The car was a Bentley Mulsanne, which was the model that Qin Mo often drove. He had bought a few of them, and parked them in different places. Sometimes Huan felt that Qin Mo had obsessive-compulsive disorder. Qin Mo handed her a thermos. It's healthy. Drink a little first. We'll have breakfast at the apartment later. Huan glared at him. He smiled. She couldn't help asking, Where are we going now? Qin Mo's fingers were on the steering wheel. He thought for a moment and said, It's not far, just a few minutes' drive. I have to stay with the crew. She frowned. Qin Mo, you're putting me in a difficult position. That means you care. Otherwise, you would have refused. He smiled. Huan looked at him and didn't say anything. Her denial was a tacit agreement. Qin Mo's lips curled up, and he didn't say anything else. After driving for 10 minutes, he stopped the car in front of a commercial building and turned off the engine. Huan looked at him. He smiled. I bought the top floor 24 hours ago. I'll be staying there for 2 months. It was only when Huan went up with him that she realized how unrealistic he was. It was an apartment of about 500 square meters, which was ridiculously large. The transparent floor-to-ceiling windows allowed one to have a panoramic view of the entire sea city. There was also a gym, a small conference room, and a study. Of course, there was also a private space. Their master bedroom, changing room, and living room took up more than 200 square meters. The whole decoration was mainly European. It was not very luxurious, but it was quite tasteful. But when the door to the master bedroom was pulled open, Huan didn't feel it anymore. The pure white Italian handmade wool carpet was covered with black roses. The visual impact of black and white was very distinct. In the middle of the bedroom, there was a large bed that was about 3 meters wide. Intuition told him that he could unlock various skills and postures. Huan took off her indoor slippers and stepped on the soft carpet with her bare feet. After a while, she turned to look at Chin Mo. Is this what you mean by making do? He leaned against the door with an indulgent smile on his face. As long as you like it. As he said that, his gaze fell on her little feet. His eyes burned, and then his voice became hoarse. There's a gift on the bed. Aren't you going to take a look? Yihuan was surprised. She bit her lip and looked at it. It was a square box. Chapter 4304. Yihuan's fingers stroked it gently. I heard that the little black dress is for revenge. He nodded. You can wear it and torture me to your heart's content. I thought you would use the word ruling. Yihuan smiled and turned to look at him. Chin Mo smiled slightly. As long as you like it. Yihuan's fingers were still stroking the box. After a while, she said in a low voice. Are you here for work or for vacation? Chin Mo walked over and reached out to hug her waist. She was very thin, so he easily hugged her. His voice was still low and husky. I want to accompany you. Probably because these words were very pleasing to her ears, Yihuan didn't say anything else. Later, Chin Mo helped her put on the dress. She looked very beautiful in it. He hugged her and danced for a while. Later, he pressed her against the soft bed and lingered for a long time. When everything was over, it was almost 12 o'clock. Yihuan lay in Chin Mo's arms and gently stroked his chest with one hand. You're too indulgent. You've just recovered from your illness. He chuckled and exhaled contentedly. We probably have to have lunch together. Yihuan moved. I want to take a shower. Chin Mo held her with one arm and got up slightly. Then he pressed a button on the bedside. Almost immediately, a very professional and calm voice rang out. President Chin. Prepare lunch. Chin Mo said simply and then put down the button. Yihuan frowned. What kind of high-level butler service is this? Chin Mo smiled and then said faintly. I forgot to tell you, this building is King Entertainment's office in Sea City. Yihuan stared at him for a long time before asking. The entire building? He grunted. Then Yihuan was about to explode. Why didn't he say so earlier? And now they were having sex in King Entertainment's office. Yihuan raised her head, and then kicked Chin Mo and exhaled. You're so hateful. Chin Mo chuckled and watched her walk to the bathroom with only a small towel wrapped around her body. His voice was low and deep, very pleasing to the ear. After a while, he got up and took a shower with her. At the same time, he pressed Yihuan against the wall and kissed her for a long time. It was not until her legs went weak and her eyes were mesmerized that he finally let her go. By the time Yihuan came back to her senses, Chin Mo had already walked out because someone had rung the doorbell. The service staff, who looked like a senior butler, pushed the dining cart over. They did not dare to look at President Chin, who was only wearing a bathrobe. President Chin's hair was wet, and there were obvious hickeys on his neck, as well as some scratches and bites. It was so intense in broad daylight. Chin Mo closed the door and pushed the cart in. He set up the dining room and placed a crystal vase on the dining table. There were 2 roses in it, one white and one black. Yihuan came out and sat down. After quietly looking at the vase for a while, she raised her eyebrows and looked at him. It's for you. Chin Mo smiled. It's the work of some master from the 18th century. I think it's more than $1 million. US dollars. Tacky, Yihuan said as she sized up the vase. How could something worth about 10 million be bad? It was just too wasteful. She then said, looks like Chinchin's squandering is traceable. Chin Mo smiled. I hope you squander more so that you can rely on me more. Chapter 4305. Chin Mo caressed her hair gently and smiled gently. Girls don't have to work so hard. Yihuan frowned and started cutting the lamb chops. After a few mouthfuls, she suddenly asked, Chin Mo, is the woman in your heart someone like Chin Mu or Cher? Actually, Tang Cher was a few years older than her. However, Yihuan felt that a woman who was pampered shouldn't be a girl, and always looked like a little girl. Was that what Chin Mo liked? As she cut the lamb chops, she thought that perhaps the 2 brothers had the same taste. Chin Mo looked at her and suddenly smiled. It's okay to have interests and hobbies, but I don't think it's for money. It's just for happiness. It's better for men to earn money. His explanation actually worked, but Huan still said fiercely, "You're a male chauvinist." Actually, Emo wasn't just bossy in this aspect. He was also very controlling in bed. Huan was often satisfied, but he wasn't satisfied yet. Or even when he was clearly satisfied, he still wanted her to cry and beg him to let go. Huan blushed at the thought of this. She didn't say anything for a long time, and just ate quietly. Emo glanced at her. "What are you thinking about?" He placed the lamb chops on her plate. Huan shook her head. "Nothing." As a mature and experienced man, he could roughly guess what was going through her mind. He chuckled and leaned over. "Still not satisfied?" Huan looked up and saw his handsome face. Her mind went blank and she blurted out, "Yeah." What she meant was how could she be satisfied if she ate? However, Emo clearly didn't mean that. He smiled and became even happier. He said softly, "I'll feed you some later." Huan finally snapped back to her senses. She bit her lip and glared at him. However, this kind of gaze was only fierce and didn't have much lethality. Emo pinched her face. "Eat." Huan ignored him and lowered her head to eat quietly. Just then Mo's phone rang. Emo glanced at it and pressed it down without batting an eyelid. Huan didn't care for the first time. Then the phone rang again. Emo pressed the button again and saw Huan looking at him. He smiled faintly. "It's Vice President Qian." Huan nodded and said, "I thought it was AI Jia." Emo looked at her and handed the phone to her quietly. "I didn't answer her call." Huan did not look at it. It was meaningless to look at it. She continued to eat, but her mood was obviously bad. She had no intention of talking to Emo. He put his hand on the back of hers and said, "I don't like her." "But you can't ignore her, right?" Huan lowered her gaze. "I meant what I said to you. Emo, I'm being selfish. I'm marrying you. Not everyone in the Qin family. Qin Lu saved you, so I can only thank him. As for AI Jia, I don't think Qin Lu would want her to pester his brother." Emo smiled bitterly. "I know. That's why I didn't answer her call." Huan continued. "Actually, you shouldn't have let her return to B City at all. Emo, I think she took the initiative to get in touch with you. And you felt that you had an obligation to heal her, right? I know that you've been visiting her in America all these years, and that's why I can't really be with you." Chapter 4306. She let out a long sigh. "It's never Rongyu who's between us but AI Jia." Huan probably didn't want to talk to him anymore. She got up and walked to the French window, looking at City C. It was a second-tier city. It wasn't as prosperous as City B, but it had its own special charm. Emo walked behind her and hugged her. He didn't say anything. He just hugged her and absorbed her warmth. Huan looked down. "Emo, you can't be so selfish. Is that what you think of me?" His voice was hoarse. "Huan, I've liked you for so many years. I've waited for you for so long. I can't bear to see you come back. I've arranged for you to stay here, and I've given you a romantic surprise. Is all this selfish? Isn't there anything else?" Huan pushed his hand away and said in a low voice, "Don't talk to me about this." She knew it in her heart. She couldn't deny it. She wanted to leave, but Emo reached out and pulled her back. Then he began to kiss her neck. Huan looked down. "I'm a little tired." "Are you tired or are you not in the mood?" Emo took a small bite, his voice hoarse. Huan didn't answer his question. "I want to read the script. There's an important scene tomorrow." Mo's fingers pressed on her shoulder, and after a while he smiled slightly. "Okay," he said and took her to the living room attached to the master bedroom. "Your things are here, and your clothes are in the changing room. I'll go to the study." Huan leaned on the sofa and read the script. She talked with Kong Qiao and Rongyu about some details. After that, Rongyu suddenly said, "I'm going back to City B tomorrow. My flight is in the morning." Huan was stunned. She was about to say something when she saw Emo standing by the door with a stack of documents in his hand. Her heart skipped a beat. She coughed and said, "Oh, have a safe trip." Rongyu nodded and hung up the phone gently. Huan felt a little uncomfortable. There was an indescribable feeling in her heart. Before she married Chin Mo, she had liked Rongyu for many years. Rongyu had always occupied a place in her heart. But she wouldn't let this place become bigger, because she had promised Chin Mo. Huan was the kind of person who knew what was right and what was wrong. Rongyu had never proposed anything to her, so they were at most old friends. After hanging up the phone, Huan felt a little disappointed. Rongyu had spent almost all of her youth. Chin Mo carefully looked at her eyes and smiled faintly. Look at you. You look like you're about to cry. What happened? He clearly knew that it was Rongyu's call, but he still said that. Was he doing it on purpose? Huan glared at him. I didn't. Chin Mo crossed his arms in front of him and smiled. Let me guess. Is it because Rongyu is leaving the crew and can't bear to part with him? Huan glared at him. Don't you dare. You guessed it. He walked over, bent down, looked at her carefully and said very gently, Do you want me to comfort you? She glared at him and didn't say anything for a long time. Just when they were in a deadlock, Huan's phone rang again. She looked at it and saw that it was Kong Chiao. The pressure in Chin Mo's eyes was obviously less oppressive, but he still sat next to her. Huan picked up the phone and wanted to lean to the other side, but Chin Mo quickly stretched out a hand and pulled her into his arms. Then he gently bit behind her ear and said, Answer the phone. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.